What I try to do in my book, Revolt, is explain the mess that we are faced with. And I think we all sense that it's a complete mess in our global structures, in our world politics. And basically, all explanations that were given have failed till now. One big explanation, you might remember, was by Francis Fukuyama, the last man, the end of history. And Fukuyama basically said in the end of the 1990s that history has ended with liberal democracy. And of course, then 9/11 happened. And he was proven wrong on many levels. Then, as a response, Samuel Huntington wrote The Clash of Civilizations, basically arguing something that conservatives, and sometimes, unfortunately, xenophobes, nationalists, and the rest, really liked. He said that what we're going to have here in the world is a clash of ethnic, religious civilizations which have existed from times immemorial, the Islamic civilization. And he even had, these maps saying, where does one civilization begin and the other civilization ends? Unlike Fukuyama, which was right for his time, Huntington was already wrong when he wrote that down. Is there really an ethnic, religious, historic identity so different in every place in the world? When you cross from Morocco to Spain, is it the way that actually the world works in international relations? So most scholars in international relations didn't think so. And of course, if I'm talking about Zizek, there's the Marxist comprehension of globalization, which is basically that it is all about exploitation, right? So we had radicals and Marxists and Bakunists. When I wrote Bakuninists in my book, the editor said, I have never seen the word Bakunin used this way, but I'm going to let it go. So they said, we need to tear down the system. They said that in Seattle, and then they said it in many other places, because this system is unjust, it brings misery to so many people, and it's actually a way, and only a way, for big corporations and those they subdue to make profit. And that's also wrong, because since they said that, more than 1 billion people escape poverty in the world's most poorest nations. And extreme poverty is humanity's most severe and most deadly condition. And they couldn't have done that without some sort of a capitalist system and of globalization. That's the truth. So, what are we faced with? What I'm trying to argue is that we are facing a question that has lived within us through the most essential polity that the world has ever seen in human civilization. And that polity is, of course, empire. Empire is the oldest, the most ancient polity that humans created. We are living without empires only in the last 200 years. And within empires, there was always a dissonance, a paradox, a tension. And this tension, for instance, was exemplified by the Jewish rebellion against Rome. I'm Jewish, and we see sometimes in archaeological digs the signatures of those great fires. Jews lived a very good life within Rome. They were part of elites, whether it was in Rome, the city, or in Palestine, the land of Israel. And they enjoyed their life, but they needed something else. And they revolted against Rome, like others revolted against Rome, because in this tension between being part of something bigger, in which your identity, sometimes your religious identity, your communitarian identity, is being immersed in a polity and in an ideology which is larger than yourself, and the benefits it brings with you. And between the self-definition, or what we call today the national self-determination, some of them, not all of them, not most of them, were willing to lose everything and to keep what they considered to be their identity. And this conversation or struggle within empires always existed between people who did not want to be ruled by others. It is a tension that a Hebrew poet called Yuval, some of you might know him, wrote in a famous poem. He talked about the existence of humans, just individuals. And he said, the poem is called Open, Closed, Open. And this is, I argue, the essential question. This is the final question. Are we advancing towards a perception of the world as whole? Are we advancing into a position in which we give more and more power to international bodies? Is our identity, in some sorts of ways, sometimes too intricate to even understand, becoming more global? Or do we find our happiness, our ways to live a good life, to quote the basic Greek philosophers' questions, Epicurus' questions, is the way to live a good life within the smallness of our world? And what we are facing today in globalization is this struggle rising after the fall, of course, of the age of stability and responsibility. Some of us, not all of us, were lucky enough to be born between 1945 and 2001. I choose September 11 as they chose 476 to mark the fall of Rome. I'm not saying Rome, people who lived in Rome in 476, they didn't know Rome fell. Nobody came out to them and said, oh, Rome has fallen, a new era of Western civilization has just begun. We have begun the Middle Ages. This is not how it worked. They saw it occupied and occupied again. And then came historians and they said, we need to put a mark on when Rome fell, and we'll put that mark on the time in which one head of one tribe declared himself the king of Rome. And we know that Romans hated the concept of kingship. And if they use that, probably we can say that Rome the empire, Rome the republic, Rome the civilization as we know it was dead. But people didn't understand it was dead. And so we did not understand on September 11, which we all live on the edges of that moment. We did not understand that the age of stability, responsibility, that age of pause died. Now, I'm not glorifying that age. It was the age of the Cold War. Children all around the world woke up at night thinking they might be annihilated by nuclear weapons. Many people died, usually on the peripheries of these empires, these blocs, in Vietnam, in Cambodia, in many other places, South America, Central America. They were fighting to the last drop of their allies. But that era was an era in which something lived, and what lived was the memory of men and women who remembered a world burning. The physical memory, not the historical memory, not being taught in classrooms, not going to museums. People knew that the world was burned. They knew. Some of them experienced 2 world wars. Others lost a family member. Others saw the news. Others lived here in Amsterdam. And they knew that this world collapsed into a turmoil of fire and mass murder. And this, basically, this physical memory scared them. Pardon the expression, it scared the shit out of them. And they made their commitments to central party ideas. They made their commitments to mainstream politics in its widest sense. And what I'm saying is not me doing philosophy on this. I'm speaking based on polls, on research. You saw what happened when a Goldwater arose in the United States. You saw what happened in the Politburo when someone who was too extreme gained power. The systems, the administration, they knew, the institutions, they knew how to destroy these peoples. But most of all, it was the voters or the party members who didn't want them to begin with. Now you need to know two things about that age. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it the age of responsibility. You can call it the age of the Cold War. It doesn't really matter. You need to know two things. The first thing is that it is a rarity in modern times. In modern times, since modernity began, these are times of upheavals, of revolutions, of changes. The world is changing around us. Our political systems are not changing quickly enough with it. We have worker unions, we have rights, we have, deferred identity. Loads of stuff is happening. So the fact that between 1945 and 2001, there was a relative stability, and I could teach any first grader that the world is divided into two. There's the communists on one side, there's the capitalists on the other side. Sometimes countries are saying that they're not aligned, they are aligned, and that's it. This doesn't really happen in modernity. And the second thing you need to know is what you already sense, that this era is over, that it's over and done with. And what I argue in the book is that concepts, mainly in Europe and in the US, that this is merely a bump in the road, a populist wave, a nationalist resurgence. These are all excuses of people who usually do not understand that this, what we are seeing right now, is the new time in which we live. And it's not going to change for a really long time. What is this time about? First, it's about the deconstruction of power structures. Power structures are seen as irrelevant, corrupt, unsuitable for the challenges of our world. Do I need to give you these examples after we have seen the pandemic? Look what happened in the pandemic. We had scientists here saying, you need a vaccine? We're going to generate a vaccine within a year. 4 months after it all began, they already had the prototype of the vaccine, the same vaccine they used, Moderna and Pfizer both, to shoot into our arms. So scientists, they cooperated, basically. They opened all the studies, all the articles in all their journals. You don't need to pay if you want to read those studies about the vaccines or about the disease. This is what I do for my day job. You can go to the Lancet, to the New England Journal of Medicine. You can do that. They're doing it for free because they understand how important it is. They're sharing information between labs around the world. They rose to the moment in a way that humanity was never able to do against a formidable, exponential enemy. Science has presented an exponential response. I'm not just using this because it sounds good, although it does. I'm using this because, truthfully, it was an exponential response using, master computers and an international web. And what happened to our politics, meantime? What happened to our power structures? Basically, almost everywhere they failed. They failed us almost everywhere. So, of course, there are exceptions. And sometimes people choose their own exceptions. Some people would say, oh no, it was great in Sweden. I don't think so, but this is a different discussion. Some people would say, no, it was fantastic in New Zealand. Maybe, I don't know. But basically, if you look at power structures, they reacted slowly, inefficiently. They lost, in many places, the trust of the public. They took us through a hefty road of political bickering, while we were facing, some of us, mainly 60-plus-year-old people, we're facing an existential threat. Politics has failed because it is failing. It is failing. It's just failing vis-a-vis the pandemic right now. So I wrote the book before people in the streets of the US were marching and saying, defund the police. I'm not sure that defunding the police is such a great idea. But when they're saying that, I think there's a point and there's a question there. Is the police serving what it needs to serve? Is it working properly? When we have most of our transactions, both legal and illegal, being done through our mobile phones, is it even possible? What about our privacy? And therefore, power structures are failing everywhere. All power structures, and therefore people seek to replace them, but they don't know with what. So the essence of the revolt is destroying the current power structures without knowing or having a good idea of what will replace them. This is not the October Revolution of 1917. This is the February Revolution of 1917. Everybody wants the Tsar out, but nobody knows exactly what's going to happen in Russia afterwards. This is something in motion. This is a sentiment. And the most important thing in politics, beyond any liberal rhetoric, is sentiment. And the sentiment is to overthrow it. And sometimes this is channeled into good goals and ideas, and sometimes it isn't. But in truth, what we are seeing right now is not sustainable. So we can divide the world right now between those who think that everything is sustainable, that this can work, what we have out there. Yeah, with petroleum, and with the way that capitalism works, and with big corporations, and with privacy issues, and with the eradication of our bioorganisms that make sure that we're still here and alive. And those who think that it's not sustainable. If you think it's not sustainable, you shouldn't really question why people are rebelling. They are rebelling because they sense it. They understand this. And they understand this on a daily basis. They come to a police officer. They have a complaint. They see he cannot handle it. I want to tell you a story about globalization, about the way that it works. I'm a journalist. That's my day job. So journalism and philosophy are the exact opposites. So they think big, we think really small. They think about ideas about the existence of man. We're saying, did someone take the photo of them coming out of the house? I have a friend that is Pakistani. And we met in a conference funded by the US State Department in 2004 because the Americans wanted to bring together people from all corners of their empire. Americans really dislike me saying empire about them. They really dislike it. So I say it as much as I can, okay? So they brought these people from Pakistan and from Palestine and from Israel and from India, and they were thinking, we're going to put all these tribes together, and they are warring tribes. We're going to put them together in a room in Boston, and they're going to have a hell of a time, and then they're going to come closer together or something. It didn't happen. So I had a friend there, Amara Durrani, she's a journalist, and she told me she's going to do a story about the clandestine relationship between Pakistan and Israel. And I don't know if you know, but in every Pakistani passport, it says, applicable to every country except Israel. It's true, it's not alleged, it's there. So she wanted to publish, an exclusive, and then she said, can I do an interview? And I said, yeah, you can do an interview. With whom would you want? She said the Prime Minister, which was Ariel Sharon. And I said, that would be impossible, I think. But I can get you Shimon Peres, which was the Peace Nobel laureate, and the late Shimon Peres. She was really happy about that. But then we had a problem, because Pakistan and Israel didn't have a phone connection at the time. And it was 2004. So I don't remember if we had Skype or anything like that, but it wasn't applicable. So she sent me the questions. I asked him the questions one of these days in the Knesset. Then I recorded the answers. I wrote them down. I sent it back to her. She asked if I wanted credit, which is the most important thing for a journalist in his life. I said, no, thank you. I don't know how this will develop. Don't get yourself too mixed up. She published a big interview with Shimon Peres, and the headline was, Pakistan should play a role in the negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and we want peace. It was the main headline of the widest speaking English newspaper in Pakistan. We were really happy about that. She was really happy. I was really happy. We were all on our Yahoo emails. It was the time of the Yahoo emails. You know, some of you were not born. And then the next day, about 24 armed men stormed her newspaper and burned the place down. Now, this is a story about globalization. It's a good story about globalization. We have an empire here. The empire has interests. This is not just happening that I meet a Pakistani friend somewhere. Someone funded our flight tickets to be very, very unphilosophical. Then we meet, and there's an interaction. This interaction leads to something which is part of our ecosystem, which is basically a global identity, the idea of peace, the idea of relations. Then it gets published through international email, you know, the World Wide Web. And then fundamentalists, they were Islamist fundamentalists, go and storm the place and try to burn it down. No one was seriously hurt, and she was not there. This is a good story about how globalization attacks local power structures and ideas. And it does it constantly. And it does it through something I write about in the book, which I labeled the global consciousness. So, if you think about the Great Fire of London, you remember that year? It was a dreadful year. So, how many people outside of London knew about the Great Fire of London? Many did. In the UK, right? In England, many did. How many people knew in Amsterdam? Probably a lot of merchants did. I'm sure that I can find the chronicles for that. But how many did know this about the capital of a wide, far-reaching power? It wasn't exactly an empire at the time, with a maritime force. How many knew about this from all humans living at the time? A very small minority. You know, rich merchants, people who knew how to read, maybe monks, people who, of course, lived in London. So I can imagine someone who lives outside of London, suddenly people come there, and they need his wood because London burned down. And then he asks questions, and he has an interest to know what happened because they're going to take his wood because the king has ordered to rebuild the city. Now think about 9/11. How many people knew about 9/11? And how quickly did they know about 9/11? And the answer is basically everyone and automatically. Did it influence everyone? No, it didn't. But it could have influenced anyone and everyone. And this is really important. People have a vested interest to know more about the world and to reserve the memories that they do have about the world in order to survive and flourish within this world. So they develop a global consciousness. This consciousness doesn't mean I agree with people. Some people saw it in Pakistan, they thought one thing. Some people saw it in Afghanistan or in Israel, and they thought another thing from someone living in Amsterdam. That's fine. But the point is that they all have a piece of fact in their mind, and it comprises of the layers of identity, which are basically our memories. And thus it begins. I can meet someone. 400 years ago, we would have nothing to talk about because we would have lived 2,000 miles away. But today, we can all joke, and it's very gratifying, about Donald J. Trump. And people do that. it's a good conversation topic. So we have this kind of very limited, yet expanding consciousness. And what does it mean? It means that, for instance, in Tunisia, the signature of the Arab Spring was the jasmine flower. And then, a few months later, there were some widespread demonstrations in some parts of China. And in order to signify these demonstrations, they would hand out jasmines. Do you know how the regime responded? They immediately erased the word jasmine from all WeChat. They canceled the Jasmine Festival. They took down, there's a famous song about jasmine in Chinese tradition, and there's the former chairman of the Communist Party, Zemin, singing it, so they took that down too. They were ordered, Secret Service, to arrest people who are buying large quantities of jasmine. What happened here? Jasmine lost its local significance, and it became something that could connect people through symbolism in many, many other places. A clash of civilizations? Are we joking? What kind of civilization is that? It's a global civilization. For years, the BBC has been doing a survey about, do people consider themselves more a citizen of the world or a citizen of your country? Behold, in 2016, after Brexit, they finally reached a benchmark. 51% or more than the global population surveyed from many, many countries said they are more citizens of the world than they are citizens of their country. But there's a remarkable development there that you as Europeans probably have sensed. 15 years ago, it was the Europeans and the Americans and some others that thought about themselves as more citizens of the world than citizens of their country. But the tide has shifted. It was the Nigerians, the Chinese, the Indians that brought that majority to be. And it was the white folks that abandoned ship. Globalization has expanded to the point that it became a threat to their own power structures. It was no longer a nicety, something you just say. I remind you, it was 2016. I was in the beaches of Kos, covering the landing of people from Syria. This was the environment in which Donald Trump won the 2016 election. The first ad he used was of Syrian refugees walking in Europe. This was the first nationally televised ad. He didn't tell Americans that it was, of course, there. So, revolt is not a bump in the road. Revolt is our new reality. And it is because it is unsustainable. Now, religion is also collapsing. If you look at the number of people who define themselves as without a religion in the United States, for the first time in history, the biggest denomination in the United States are people that are religionless. They don't have a religion. So what we keep hearing on the TV screens is usually evangelicals and the rise of fundamentalism. But this is a reaction to something much wider. And then comes the question. If globalization did improve the human condition, as it did, if 1 billion people escaped poverty, as they did, and our life has changed, we became richer in the Western countries, and we did. Our life expectancy became higher. There was a video here of Barack Obama explaining before the 2016 elections how good it is for us. There are loads of books like that who explain to us that actually we should be so very thankful for the gifts of enlightenment, like Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker and others. And they're all true. So if everything is so much better, why do people feel so much worse? And this is, I think, a big political question. It's, of course, a question of our existence. Why can't liberals, and it's basically liberals who are making these arguments, convince people that it's actually working great right now? Why can't they enlist them to this progressive idea? And my answer to this is because they have settled for too little. In the end, when we look at progress, and this is the quote opening my book by Frederick Douglass, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Struggle is the basis for everything. And in that quote, Douglass is saying, people who want progress without struggle are like those who want to crop the fields without sowing them first. And he's talking about slavery. So for too long, these elites have forgotten that in order to maintain the condition improving, we don't only need to appreciate it, we don't need only to glorify it. Glorifying, talking about it, educating for it, this is for churches. This is not for progressives. What we need to do is we need to maintain the energy and the inertia of change in our societies. And we have not done so. If you look at what happened in the United States toward 2016, you see it so vividly. I was there, and I was there in a family of coal miners, and I write about it. In 2016, in June 2016, 5 months before Donald Trump won the elections. And I traveled to Pennsylvania, not because I knew that he's going to carry Pennsylvania and he's going to win the elections. I didn't think so. Nobody knew that. But I did know that if he is going to win, and the zeitgeist is that he will win, he will need to carry Pennsylvania. So I said, let's go, see what's happening there. Let's talk with people there. And I went to a coal mining family. They voted only for Democrats. And I sat in their living room until they said to me, you can go now. and I asked them, what do you think about America? What do you think about the world? And every child had a mobile phone with him. So they were there, but they were on their mobile phones. And the man was unemployed. And they told me loads of stuff about their disappointment.
I start a new job tomorrow because he doesn't make enough money.
Now, working in a coal mine, we could.
Well, yeah, I stayed home.
It was no problem.
For both of them, this is my first. I haven't worked in 7 years.
I gotta work twice as hard, longer days, just to make half of what I was making in a coal mine.
They're saying we don't care, you know, if the mine closes down, there'll be other jobs. You know, we're not going to subsidize coal. That's free market, right? Yeah. So maybe that's America for you. I don't know. I'm asking because I'm not American. Okay. I don't know.
But does it make sense to mine the coal here in the U.S. and send it to China for their power plants to run? Okay, yeah. And shut ours all down?
And that's the whole thing. It's just America. It's like lazy. They want to depend on everybody else. Oh, we'll just throw money here.
But it's okay to help everybody else out. They never help people in this country.
Then you better stop swimming or you'll sink like a stone. For the times they are changing.
Do you think that this is the greatest country on earth?
No.
No?
No.
I do not either. I will not say that I'm proud. I'm embarrassed more and more.
Yeah, maybe it was like back.
I'm not.
When your dad was growing up.
Yep.
Yeah. In them times, but now?
No, it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
We have children that are starving. There's children, families. There are people that don't choose to work, that live off the system. but they don't. Nobody helps their own. It's never about here. It's always what we can get cheaper overseas, what we can buy cheaper overseas, what we can do in other countries. Never here.
Do you ever vote for a Republican?
No,
Never.
never.
I have never
You
voted.
never voted for a Republican?
Nope.
No.
And you're going to vote for Trump?
Might have to.
She pronounced it really slowly. Never here. Now, there's a level of this which is really quite superficial and obvious. Never here means fly over country, right? Hillbilly Elegy. Did you read that book? It's a great book. So it's never here, right? We are forgotten. You enjoy yourself in Manhattan, maybe even in Chicago, in San Francisco, but you forgot all about us in the peripheries, right? So that's one level of never here. But in a globalized world in which a person can work in one place, can play Fortnite with a guy in another place, can read his intellectual inventory from a third place, is there a here here? Does here exist anymore? She was saying never here, she meant it politically. America for America, America first. But actually, deeply, what she was saying is that here disappeared. It's not there anymore. And this causes tension. And this tension comes with the injustices of cycles of exploitation in the world. Everybody is talking about high-tech hubs. I come from a country that's really proud with its high-tech hubs. I talk about exploitation hubs. I know that sometimes when I wrote it down, some of my editors said, "Are you a Marxist?" I said, "Only on a Saturday." But I use the term exploitation because these are exploitation hubs. You come to a place, you use local monopoly in order to sell people things, and there is no competition. They need to buy these specific things. You use the gaps in labor law. You use the gaps in production, in the extraction of materials. You use all of these things, and you exploit the population there. And what's more interesting is that sometimes local agents are part of the deal. For instance, in China, it's a good story, I think. In China, they, at the time, I don't know if you remember, there was a big issue of air pollution in Beijing. I had family that lived in Beijing. There's small eggs, it's called the egg. It shows you the level of particles in the air, and everybody was really worried, and the international press was all about that. Then they took upon themselves, the party, it always takes upon itself these missions. That's the reason that they survived the CCCP. And they solved the problem. And the air particles, everything, all measurements, the US Embassy measurement said air particles, air quality is great in Beijing, or at least it's much better than many places in the world. Then researchers started checking that. And what they discovered is that the Chinese basically moved a lot of these coal plants to their peripheries. And actually, the level of particles in the air in China increased. So things became actually worse, but they seemed in the center of the metropole better. They are using their own periphery as an exploitation center. And now they are moving parts of their factories into Southern Asia to other, and they are doing to these countries what we have done to them. Now, the thing about these exploitation hubs is that because globalization and liberalism is empowering, and it's a dialectical process, not only of darkness, like some of the Marxists say, and not only of light, like some of the thinkers in the West think. Because of that, they cannot survive. You look at, for instance, the Opium War and the way that the West oppressed China. the East India Company in order to force them to buy heroin, basically, or drugs. So it took 100 years. The Chinese say 100 years of humiliation. And then they got out. Then you look even before that, on Haiti. How much time did it take for that exploitation hub to explode with the first big modern slave rebellion of our times? It took them hundreds of years. Then you look at Bougainville, a small island. You probably know about it because of Dutch history. So in Bougainville, they find the biggest copper mine in the world, 1960s. Started developing it in the 1970s. Then a rebellion of the local population broke out. It took them about 15 years. This is what's happening to exploitation hubs all around us. The time of their life, the lifespan of exploitation hubs is contracting. And like hurricanes in an age of a global climate crisis, they are becoming more vicious, working their way from one place to another. If I find out as a journalist that an international corporation is making these shoes in a sweatshop and I publish it, then they need to take care of it. They need to move it to another place. If I discover, as the Sky News discover, that the material in our phones, columbite tantalite or coltan, is coming from mines in which children that are 5-year-old are working and are being beaten, then they need to take care of that. And they need to rotate quickly in order to survive all the time from one place to the other. But their lifespans is, in the end, contracting. Although liberalism was never meant to liberate everyone, and in that sense, Marxists are right, it was always used as a pretext for empire, nevertheless, it does liberate. Not because people want it to. And in order for our global system to change and progress, what we need to do right now is to acknowledge how unsustainable it is. And to understand that our way forward is through the notions of progress. But it doesn't mean saying how great it was in the past and how good it is in the present. It means saying how lousy stuff are now and how do we intend to change them right now, or else everything we see will not survive. Because the revolt against globalization, taking many forms right now, will change in the end. If we will not tackle these injustices, will change to a full-blown rebellion against the values of progress. We are already seeing it. Charlatans, nationalists, Nazis. I've interviewed these people, from neo-Nazis to Marine Le Pen, to fascists, to racists in Greece. I've seen these people. I've been covering them for more than a decade now. And I'm telling you, they're on a march right now. And the pandemic is going to help them. And they're going to use these grievances, which are legitimate, of the rebels, in order to gain force again. And if the progressives think that what they're going to do is sit in their churches, which are today their academias, and explain to everyone that everything is just dandy, well, no, that's not the way.
Thank you very much, Nadav Eyal. We have, maybe is there somebody who wants to ask one question? We have time for one question. Who has, yeah, I saw there. You can go to the microphone, walk to the microphone. I saw somebody there.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to ask the only question. Thank you for your lecture. It was very enlightening. On the other hand, you have been given it very much thought what revolution is currently taking place on a global place. We are here as a group who tries to do something about what's happening. Can you give us some advice as to how to move this into a direction that is beneficial for all of us?
Yeah, it's all about power. It's all about power. Maybe I'm not metaphysical enough. I'm a practical person, and I think that radicalism can change our ways of life if it's being manifested and in a way benign into power, into assuming power, holding power, and changing societies for the better. So if you're asking me, basically, what's my recipe? The recipe of what we need to do now is known to everyone. Sometimes people come to me and say, you wrote this book about the revolt, so we don't understand everything, but we understand the situation is crappy. Okay, we got that. But what do we need to do? And there's a chapter in the book in which I said we need to do this and this and this and this. None of this is my inventions. We need a global tax regime. President Biden is starting to acknowledge that. The book is out, I think, in the Netherlands like 8 months ago or something. We need a global tax regime. It's impossible for us to have a Security Council with no one that is not either white or Chinese. How is this sustainable? How is this sustainable? And of course, we cannot have countries voluntarily participating in accords that are trying to prevent the biggest catastrophe in potential for the human race and for every other race on this planet, which is climate change. We know what to do. The question is, how do we do it? And this century is not about why, it's about how we do it. And the answer, I think, lies, first of all, in how to assume power. So in that sense, Steve Bannon once said, a journalist walked to him in a party, and he said, I'm a Leninist, I want to deconstruct the state. Now this proves two things. First of all, Steve Bannon is a menace, of course. The second thing is that he doesn't know what's Leninism. In order to change things, you need to gain power. Sometimes, first you gain power, then you think. You come with intentions. You come with the best intentions. But first you gain it. Beyond principle. Okay? So I know it's very practical. Maybe it's cynical. But I'm finishing. I'll just give you an optimistic story to end with. I have a Chinese friend. He's my age. I'm 42 years old. I know I look much older. It's because of journalism. and we were both born in 1979. He grew up in a house in which there was no desk. There was no chair. And he was from a relatively wealthy family in China in 1979 because he lived in Shanghai. And they actually lived in a flat with some other families. And we started talking the other day about our lives. And he asked me, what was the best day of your week? As a child growing up in Israel in the 1980s. And I said, it was the computer lessons, which unfortunately didn't lead me to the high-tech industry. But they got me playing in computers, like Montezuma. And what was your best day? I asked him, and he said, the best day of my week was when my parents gave me money and I could take a shower in the public showers. This was the best day of his week. But then something happened in China, and that something that happened was Deng Xiaoping, which we don't talk about enough. And Deng Xiaoping happened. And I just condemn China in many aspects in this lecture. But Deng Xiaoping changed China and pulled 1 billion people out of poverty, 800 million people out of poverty. And by the 1990s, both of us were on BBS, which is an early protocol of the internet. Both of us. And today, he's the CEO of a company that is traded in the NASDAQ. It's a story I tell in the book. So this happened because of policy, because of politics, because people changed things. And they made the right choices. And I find that invigorating and touching and an optimistic way of thinking about life, of how small things that just humans do, blood and flesh, even those politicians, can change life for the better. And this is why we really need to do it. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Go and read the book. Revolt, it's here, and there's a book signing now